Welcome to the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast, where we dive deep into the intersection of career, family, and finances. Learn the mindsets, tips, and strategies to help you on your personal journey to build a life of abundance and purpose for you and your family. Now here's your host, Ameen. Welcome back to the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast, where today I am joined by Marc Oshiro. Marc goes by the name the Financial Firefighter, with the fire being FIRE, Financial Independence Retire Early, for those who don't know. Marc runs an amazing YouTube channel full of interviews with insightful guests who talk all about real estate, all sorts of different scenarios. That's how he and I met. He had me on his channel a few months back, and we hit it off and have remained in touch ever since. He has an incredible story. He is an actual firefighter, in addition to promoting financial literacy and sharing about his real estate journey. So without further ado, here's my interview with Marc Oshiro. All right, Marc Oshiro, welcome to the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast. I am very excited to have you as one of my early guests because you were one of the big inspirations for starting this channel. It was not too long ago that I came on your channel. Marc has one of my favorite YouTube channels for real estate investors. He does a lot of great interviews, and he's got a great eye for finding people that have very interesting stories and backgrounds. He asks great questions, and I'm excited today to flip the script a little bit and be able to ask him some questions myself. Marc, you have an incredibly interesting background. I would love to hear you just describe in your own words what you're all about.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to do this. I know we talked about this off camera before, that you should jump into this podcasting. You're such a great writer, and we can talk about that later, but that's how you started, is more on the writing side. And I love what you write, your newsletters, and I think you're just going to kill it in this podcasting. But yeah, so I'm Marc. I'm born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm a full-time firefighter, and the things just changed for me, and I realized how risky I was being with my financial future. And I decided that I was going to take control of it. And I really went down the rabbit hole of financial literacy and real estate investing. And yeah, that's my story.
So I want to pull on one thread right away. You say you realized how risky it was. What do you mean by that?
And people are going to think I'm crazy. And I hear it a lot because my profession, we still have a pension in my department. And people look at that as very safe and secure, great benefits. And that was my mindset getting into the fire service. I loved it. I loved the benefits, the pension. And I thought my future is taken care of, right? I do my 25 years. I have this pension waiting for me. And then when the virus happened, it opened my eyes to how risky I was being, and people losing their jobs, people getting laid off. And I was like, man, I'm pretty much relying on one stream of income. And what if I get hurt or something? What if I don't finish my career? So I went down that rabbit hole thanks to another friend who was investing out of state. And yeah, that's how it all started for me.
Got it. So it wasn't the career path itself or your love for your career. It was just simply the idea of relying too much on one source of income when any number of things could potentially happen.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was I got very comfortable where I was at. I had this very stable job, great benefits. And then as I started seeing maybe my retirement accounts are not going to provide me what I'm expecting. And even with this pension, we see a lot of retired fire guys. We see them around the neighborhood. And you're like, man, they're living off a pension that maybe they retired 20 years ago. And that pension isn't growing with inflation and the economy. And I'm just like, how are these guys surviving, or how are they doing it? And it really just made me want to take control of things for myself and provide a better future for myself and my son.
Very nice. And I should have led with this, but thank you for your service. Firefighting is a heroic profession, in my opinion, and the opinion of many others. And so I think it's a very noble profession to go into. And I know you still are actively doing it. Marc told me right before I hit record that he just got off shift he was on an overnight shift. So you're very much still in it and appreciate that. The other thing is you're also being very humble because you failed to mention that you are also a licensed agent. You help manage short-term rentals. You partner with some family members, as I understand it, to own some real estate. And you own several long-term rentals from a long distance. And I'm sure I'm missing something, but I think you got quite a few things going on here. I'd love to, in whatever order you would like, start to just understand a bit. How did all that come together?
What I mentioned earlier, I had a friend that was investing in real estate out of state. So he also lives in Hawaii, but he was investing in Pittsburgh. And I didn't really touch on it yet. Me and my son's mom, we did split up. And I had a lot of time on my hands. And I looked into what my friend was doing. He said, hey, you should look into investing in real estate. You have equity in your property, your primary residence. And I said, and because my mindset was already down this, how I was being risky with my finances, I said, I'm going to look into this. And what was supposed to be a kind of slow process and see if I liked it snowballed on me. And so I did get one property at first in Pittsburgh. And as I started seeing the benefits, I was like, this is way more beneficial for me, my retirement, generational wealth. And I went all in. I don't recommend it. And this is what I chose to do, but there's a lot of ways to get into it. But I did take money out of my retirement accounts and I went down that path. And that is maybe the thing that I like to talk about most, is where that was maybe one of my biggest mistakes. Maybe it's trying to scale too quickly, but I also look at it as I don't regret doing it. Like, I think I'm going to benefit in the long run. However, for anyone out there that's looking to get started in real estate, take your time. There's no rush. Yes, you want to get started, but a lot of times I think I always joke around that maybe the first 3 or 4 properties I got was very hands-off. Things were just working very well. And that's why I was like, oh, I'm going to go all in. I'm going to scale. So I got 14 properties fairly quickly. And then that's when you realize it's not as passive as a lot of these people on social media like to make. So that's the one thing I really like to talk about, is more my mistakes that I've made.
That's one of the common threads in this show, is I really try and counter the narrative that you see a lot online of go from 0 to 100 in 3 years. It'll be fine. You'll have all this passive cash flow coming in. You won't have to answer any phone calls because your property manager will handle everything. Money will start dropping from the trees. It's this fictitious world of people sharing this amazing glorified stories, but really leaving out the risk that they might take in. A lot of the people that are in those situations, they're either being truthful or they're leaving out the leverage that they took on. They're not talking about some of the actual day-to-day management they have to do of their managers. I think there's a bigger picture that is really important to tell. And the majority of my audience, I believe, are towards the beginning of their investing journey. And it's very interesting to mention things like tap in your retirement account and all that. I did the same thing for the most recent property we bought, which was actually our 8th. And it is a risky maneuver on paper, especially, and it's not one that I would necessarily recommend. However, there are times in which you can justify it based on the deal you're getting to. There's life on a spreadsheet, and then there's life in the real world. Sometimes those things aren't the same. Every person has a different risk appetite. And generally speaking, like, those decisions you made probably made sense to you at the time that you made them. Same with me, and same for any of the listeners right now. When you make a decision about where to put your money and whether you want to get into a deal or not, that's going to be based on your own risk tolerance and where you're at in your life. So the most important thing is to just be in tune and make sure that any money you put on the table is money that you're willing to risk. But it's interesting because I like the way you said it. You said you wouldn't necessarily recommend it. However, you also don't regret it. And I think that's a pretty common thread for a lot of people. But the other thing, I would love to hear a little more about the very beginning. So you said, did you buy 3 properties in Pittsburgh? quick succession right at the beginning, or what was the beginning?
I would say maybe 4 in the first 3 to 4 months. Part of that was using lines of credit, HELOCs, like I mentioned, the retirement account. And yeah, those, like I said, those kind of tricked me. Like I got them, got tenants quickly, and it was just everything was going smoothly. And I think that gave me some false sense of results. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go all in on this. And now I'm going to take basically take everything out of my retirement accounts and maneuver some other assets around. And I said, I'm going to go all in. And especially since I've never been to Pittsburgh and that's where my properties are, I didn't really realize also maybe how cold it gets there or how the winter months are. So I did get some good deals that time of year purchasing properties. However, not a lot of people want to move during that time. So finding tenants took a lot longer than I anticipated. And just unfortunately, there's expenses that come up sometimes, whether a water heater goes out or so there's a lot of these things that a lot of these social media people don't talk about. They talk about all the good things, collecting rent on time and your property going up in value and tax benefits, but they don't talk about more the risk of owning not necessarily rental properties, but just being a homeowner. And even if you owned your own primary residence, you have maintenance expenses that come up, things you have to fix. So it's the same thing. You have rental properties and there's things that come up every once in a while. And I think that's the part too that kind of either prevents people from continuing down this journey or they don't want to start, is because these fears of fixing toilets or whatever at 2 a.m. and, all this kind of fear of, having to fix a roof or whatnot. But I think the thing is, once you get over that hump, and I think that's the key, is you have to be around people that are doing it, that have done it. And they'll tell you in the beginning, it's hard, there's a lot of work. But if you can just get over that hump, then things get a lot easier. And then the properties really start paying for whatever expenses that may come up, right? So if you have a certain amount of rentals, yeah, maybe 1 month you don't collect rent as a total because you had an expense, but basically those tenants paid for that expense for you. So that's how you have to look at it. Once you get things going, it gets a lot easier.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest mistakes I see when people talk about cash flow is they say, hey, I collected $2,000 in rent and my mortgage with my insurance and taxes was $1,500. I made $500 this month. No, probably not. You might have a property manager, you might have a small repair that comes up. And even if you don't, that $500 probably shouldn't just go into your checking account to pay off your credit card, because if you don't have an expense this month, you very well might either next month or in the coming months. I think that people view that difference between the rent and the mortgage as their cash flow. That's a huge mistake. Obviously, it's cash in your account. It's there. You can touch it or you could grab it. But I think it's important to budget for those contingencies, because even if you have 12 months of nothing, it only takes one big expense to take a nice chunk out of that, and you don't want to be caught with no reserves. That's really interesting. I think so. You built a long-term portfolio out in Pittsburgh, so you've still never been there. Did I hear that right?
I have not been there. I keep telling myself that I'm going to go because everyone says how beautiful it is. And I see pictures, I see people I connect with in those areas, and yeah, it looks amazing, but I have not been there yet.
I've heard, yeah, they call Pittsburgh the Hawaii of the Northeast.
Really? I've never heard that.
No. Oh, they don't.
I was like,
yeah, it gets a little cold there. Probably would have to dust. I don't even know. Do you own any jackets?
I own jackets. I gotta go. It's probably stashed away somewhere. Because my son's mom's from North Carolina, so it's not as cold there. Of course, for me, I need a jacket when I used to go there during the winter months. But yeah, I have a jacket.
Yeah. Maybe one day you'll visit, but that's pretty amazing. And I think it's a great lesson for listeners too, that takes a lot of courage to invest out of state. Marc's in Hawaii, so he's technically 6-hour time difference from his rentals. That means if something is going wrong, chances are the soonest he could get there is probably 20 hours or whatever it is between trying to coordinate all the various connecting flights and all that. So he's got to have a lot of trust in his team on the ground that they can handle things. And I imagine that the systems that you have and the trust that you have for your team, you built that over time, but otherwise you wouldn't still be invested there. So one topic you and I talked about, I was on your show last, was the idea of this like hybrid property management. So there's a platform we're both familiar with, and I think we both use now, called Hemlane, where you can automate all your rent collection. And they actually have a feature where you can coordinate repairs directly with the tenants through the software. So have you actually started using that? And if so, what has been your experience so far?
Yeah, so I am using that platform for 5 of my properties, and I love it so far. I think it's a great platform. It's super user friendly. I think what I really like is they really take into account feedback from the customers, and they're always innovating things. I look at them as, like maybe how Netflix and Uber just changed the whole market. I think that's how Hemlane is. They're innovators and they're constantly improving their platform. So I'm not sure what tier you're on, but I'm on the full service package. So my properties on the tier 3, I do get that 24/7 maintenance, but I like it because it's very customizable. So I know people that don't use that service year round. They may only use it when they're traveling. So they may be in the lower tier, which saves them some money, but they use their own vendors like handyman and whatnot. But maybe when they're traveling, they want that safety of just having that 24/7 maintenance in place and be even more hands off. So they use that. But for me, I have the 24/7 maintenance, but there has been a few times that I've told them, you know what, you can just cancel the request. I'm going to send out one of my guys, just because it wasn't like a full emergency. But if it's something that needs to be addressed right away, then I have that 24/7 maintenance in place, which I think is very helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I have 2 of my Vegas properties on Hemlane, but nobody's actually tried the repair coordination yet. So I know
Oh,
it's there.
man. Hopefully I
It's
didn't
there
jinx
if
you.
they need it. It's there if they need it, but I have yet to really test it. I've been happy with the software so far. It's really easy to use.
Yeah.
It's done everything that I need it to do thus far, but I'll be interested. I'm not rooting for us to need repairs, but when it comes, I'll be curious to see how it works.
Yeah, I wasn't either, but I have used it.
Yeah. And so why did you choose to use Hemlane on 5 properties, but I think you said you have 14 out there. So what was the logic behind those specific properties?
I guess those specific, I looked at when the leases were expiring, how long the tenants are going to be there, talk with the property manager. I'm sure he didn't want to give up the properties, but I asked him for his feedback on which ones he think would be an easy transition right now. So for me, I'm trying to get a proof of concept if it can be done, if you can self-manage remotely, because that's what my channel is about, talking about out-of-state investing. I'm trying to also get more into like side hustles and just help entrepreneurs. But my big thing is out-of-state investing. And, before I decided to self-manage or hybrid manage, I couldn't really give anyone any advice or feedback. It was just, no, it can't be done because that's what I hear and that's what everyone says. It's too difficult. So for me, I wanted to say, you know what, I'm going to get some hands-on experience. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But that way I can advise people like, I tried it. This is the problems I see with it, or this is the things that I like about it. And so far I've been super happy. And I do see something, I haven't had to use the leasing part of it. So that is still something that I'm definitely interested to see. Not that I want anyone to have to, not that I want any vacancies and have to find new tenants, but that is something I haven't used. But everything else, yeah, I love it so far and I would recommend it. I think it's very useful, but I wouldn't recommend it for someone just getting started out of state. I think there's so much to learn. And I think that another message that I like to get across is buying the property is actually kind of the easiest part of it. Once you close and now you're a landlord, you're all right, there's a lot of stuff I got to figure out. And I think That's the things a lot of people don't talk about.
It's a dynamic journey for sure. I've been very lucky. So when we bought our first rentals, we lived in Vegas and we bought a rental down the street from where we live. And so we decided to self-manage. Another kind of longer story is my parents invested while I was growing up and they self-managed the majority of their properties. So I think when I saw that they did that, it didn't even really occur to me, like, why hire a property manager? We can handle this stuff. And we were very lucky that we had really good tenants in our first property. And so we were able to learn how to use the software. We were able to learn rent collection, leases, and all that stuff. And it gave us a little bit of confidence. And when we moved away from Vegas, we continued to self-manage those properties. But to your point, if we were buying our first rentals and it was far away, it wouldn't have been in our backyard like that. We wouldn't have been that comfortable. I agree. I think that finding a trustworthy, good property manager in whatever market you're looking to invest in is definitely the best route. Now, actually finding a good, trustworthy property manager is much easier said than done. I'm parting ways with my third property manager in Iowa as we speak. We're wrapping up our contract. I just have not been able to find a sustainable, good relationship with a PM there. And so building these muscles of self-management and using platforms like Hemlane, I at least have enough confidence that I can stabilize our portfolio until we find a better manager. So I think there's a slider, there's a risk tolerance. Like at the very beginning, you want probably to have a manager, if you can find a good one, that can show you the ropes and learn all the different things that go into managing a property, but also getting some experience of self-management or using some of these tools is good to have in your back pocket. Because even if you have a perfect property manager, they might retire or they might sell their company to someone who's not as good. And you want to be able to be flexible because most of us buy real estate thinking we're going to hold it for 10, 20, 30 years. Chances are your property manager is not going to be in business for 30 years unless you hire them right when they start and they're in their 20s or something like that. But that's a pretty unicorn situation. So we've been talking mostly about long-term rentals, which I think is incredible and important. You have an amazing story of building that portfolio. Let's talk about some of the short-term rental management. So how did you get into that space?
Yeah, so when I went down this whole financial literacy and real estate journey, I said, "Yeah, I'm gonna get my license. I also want to get my license." And my vision was I wanted to do more property management. I'm with Remax Honolulu because they're one of the only brokerages that allow you to do sales and property management. But my vision going into it was I wanted to build like a small management portfolio. And I looked at it passive income, a steady income every month. And I looked at it from like the viewpoint of investing out of state. If you have a good property, you have a good tenant, things are pretty, I wouldn't say easy, but they're pretty hands off. And that's how I looked at property management, where if I can get good properties, place good tenants, then it's hands off in a sense. And so I have some long-term rentals that I manage. And then all of a sudden, our broker said, "Hey, do you guys want to start managing some short-term rentals?" And I'm like, you know what? I'm interested because part of me was like, I want to see what kind of systems that I can put in place and see if I can put systems in place. So if maybe down the road, I wanted to do something remotely short-term rental. But so like right now, the risk, I hate to say it, but the risk is on the property owners, right? If I don't get these properties or get guests coming through, they're the ones that have to pay their mortgage and their HOA fees. And for me, yeah, maybe they may fire me because we're not performing, but there's no financial risk from my standpoint. But I can figure out what systems work well. Like, how do you handle cleaning? How do you handle, messaging the guests? So right now, it's been eye-opening. I'm not really sure how remotely you can do it. There's a lot of questions, and I know there's AI now in a lot of these softwares. And so, but there's just questions that are very personal, I think. And I don't know how the systems are able to answer or help the guests out. So It's interesting to see that.
You can automate things like check-in instructions and things like that, but what you can't do is provide like personalized touches and local recommendations. You can have a few in a template, but if
Yeah.
somebody asks you a question like, hey, what's the best coffee shop? Or I want to take my kids out to a beach. I want this specific type of activity. What do you suggest? You definitely can't replicate that with AI.
Yeah.
And I imagine that as short-term rentals have become more and more popular over the years, that those little touches make the difference between people wanting to come back and giving high ratings. I think the standard has risen quite a bit for what people expect when they pay pretty high prices to stay at short-term rentals. So that's got to be really interesting. Similarly, like you're learning all these systems to where now I forget if you own any short-term rentals or not, but now if you want to, you'll be able to operate them effectively because you've had so much practice.
Yeah, I do not own any, but that's something I was thinking about for my maybe next investment is if I can find a short-term rental that I can now manage my own or manage it myself so that I can get a lot of the tax benefits for the short-term rental kind of loophole as offsetting my active income. However, it's very challenging to find a legal short-term rental in Hawaii because a lot of the ones that are in apartments and whatnot in Waikiki, a lot of them are leasehold. So you actually don't own the property. So it's more like an Airbnb arbitrage. So you wouldn't
Yeah.
get that benefit. So that's where I was thinking if I do it remotely someplace, if I could get those benefits. But now that I've been doing it, I'm like, I don't know how effective it would be remotely.
It's one of those things where it sounds like you've layered on skills as you go. Before you bought your first long-term rental, I imagine if you dove straight into trying to manage short-term rentals, it would have been a lot harder, right? Because you've built more tolerance and comfort and understanding of like how these dynamics work. You're smiling. Did I get the order? Did I get the
Oh,
order wrong?
man, I hate to say it, but some of these guests that stay at your Airbnb, some of the questions they ask, you gotta take a deep breath and realize maybe there is a little bit of a language barrier or the instructions aren't that clear. But yeah, some of the questions they ask, it's just amazing. You wonder, man, how have you survived to 40 years old when you don't know how to turn on the air conditioning or something? It's eye-opening. But
Yeah.
I also like to tell people like that's why probably when you go to an Airbnb, there's so much instructions because at some point there was a guest that didn't know how to do something and they asked you this question and now you're like, okay, you know what, I might as well just put it in the listing or put it in the instructions because maybe it wasn't clear or somebody couldn't figure it out. So that's why I think so many times when you see these Airbnb instructions, they're like so detailed and it's like a novel you're reading.
This applies to long-term rentals too, though, right? If you ever get the same question more than twice, write it down and stick it in a drawer at the house, right? People, if they want to know, I don't know, how to use a certain appliance that even if you think it's silly that it's tricking them, that they can't figure it out, doesn't matter. Like they're living in your house, they're paying you rent. Write it down, make it easy. And it'll also act as a blocker for you taking a bunch of phone calls that you don't need to take.
Yeah.
That's my golden rule is if somebody keeps asking like multiple times, just
Yeah.
write it down and either give it to your property manager or put it in whatever documentation you give to the tenants when they move in. But I say that and I still get questions all the time. I have yet to figure out how to stop getting questions entirely from my tenants.
Yeah.
But we now self-manage 6 out of our properties, so that is bound to happen. If we wanted to completely deflect all questions, we would hire out property managers. But I keep doubling back to what I said a few minutes ago. Like we have struggled to find great property managers. We've found good ones. We've found some kept the lights on, but ultimately we have never found one that we're just like this. I totally trust this person through and through. We did have a property manager in Iowa that was wonderful, but then she was also an agent and she decided she couldn't do both. And she chose to go be an agent and close down her property manager business. It's like I was saying earlier, you might find the perfect PM, but then there's no guarantee they're going to be around for the long haul. That's awesome. You got a diverse type of experience as a property manager, as a property owner. You've property managed for other owners, so you've seen both sides. That's a valuable perspective that I'm sure helps you probably have a little more grace and tolerance for
Yeah.
your own property managers to help you out because you can see some of the stuff they're dealing with all the time.
That's
Yeah.
my sales pitch is that I tell these owners when they, want to have a talk to see if we'll be a good fit. I tell them, I have properties 5,000 miles away, and I know how important it is for communication between your property manager and wanting updates. So that's my sales pitch to anyone that, is considering us for property management, especially the short-term rental. They have so many questions, how we handle things. And, I tell them, I say, I understand the importance of communication and getting things done because my properties, they're 5,000 miles away. And sometimes things get lost in emails and text messages. And following up is super important.
Yeah, that's an amazing thing to be able to say is I understand your position. And the other thing too that we got to remember is, I don't know about you, but I think most people in the world, myself included, have rented from a landlord before. So we know what it's like to rent and sign a lease that somebody else produced. It has a set of rules and sometimes you don't understand them, especially I remember being 18 and 19 years old signing leases, and I paid more attention than probably most people do. But there are times where like I had questions that looking back, I'm like, oh, maybe that was a silly question. But so I try and remember that too. When people are asking me questions, it's not everyone lives and breathes real estate and looks at leases all the time. So just having a little bit of patience and tolerance, definitely an important trait to have. So I want to circle back. So you are the financial and literal firefighter. What have you learned from your career, which you are still active in, that you use in your real estate investing journey? What kind of skills, mindsets, attitudes, what helps you succeed as a real estate investor?
Oh, I think the biggest thing for me is, and I forget, one of my older captains always said it, but it was adapt, improvise, and overcome. Sometimes you can do all the research you want, book studying, like you said, spreadsheets. No incident, no fire is ever the same. And you got to go to this emergency. And yes, you have somewhat of a background or knowledge that you're going to refer back to, but you got to figure things out. And you're going to make mistakes sometimes, but you have to be able to recover. And you got to be able to just go with the flow. And at the end of the day, don't leave a situation in worse shape, right? So you want to mitigate things and figure it out. And I think that's the biggest thing for me has really helped me is just realizing that as bad as something breaking or having an expense come up or your tenant not or paying rent late, it's not the end of the world. And then usually there's a solution, and usually somebody has figured it out or done it at some point. So I think that's where experience and just networking, that's how we've met. And we met a whole group of great guys and great people, and just maybe pick their brains like, hey, how would you handle this situation? And I think that's super important, is just realizing that problems are going to happen. Somebody probably figured it out at some point or had a solution, and you just got to figure it out.
That is one of my favorite phrases: improvise, adapt, and overcome. I remember I had a teacher in high school. He was in the army and he was in Iraq in the early 2000s. And he would share some of his learnings from being in the military with us, mostly the philosophy and the kind of discipline that they formed, some of the strategies they used in really hectic real-time situations. And like you said, no fire is the same as the one before or the next one coming. And I imagine one other thing is just making quick decisions, right? Sometimes we don't have the luxury of sitting down for 8 hours and agonizing over every detail of a decision before we make it. It's like you have to make decisions in the moment every time you show up for your job. And that skill and building that muscle I can see how that would be valuable in real estate.
I think the most important part of that is being able to justify your decision. So like you're saying, there's times you're going to have to make quick decisions But the thing is, make your decision, but have a reason why you did it. Don't, if you made this decision, say, I made it because this is what I saw, right? This is the cash on cash return I saw. This is the location of the property I saw. And that's what I made my decision on. And sometimes you make a mistake. Maybe you didn't realize there was expenses that were going to come up on this property, or maybe the area wasn't as good as you thought. But from what you saw, be able to justify your decision, I think you'll be fine.
Absolutely. So we started getting into it, but let's open this now. We met on Twitter, which is now known as X, and we met so it's the internet, it's social media. We live in a world now where some of the best networking you can do is on the internet and social media. The internet has been prominent now for 25 years, but I think just there's such a wealth of knowledge, particularly on Twitter. There's an amazing community if you can find it and tap into it. So how did you decide? It takes time to participate in these online conversations and forums and listen to podcasts and start shows and all that. So at what point did you decide to start spending time in that space? And then also, how did that lead to launching your channel, which is no small task, right? It takes time and energy to run a channel.
Yeah, good question. I think part of it is maybe to a fault. I get focused on a lot of things. When I find passion from it, or it becomes my passion, I get very tunnel vision. And I think once like I said, I got the bug for real estate, I went down that rabbit hole and I was learning about, I realized that it's not just, like you're saying, not just buying a home anymore. There's financing, lending, there's property management side, there's renovation side. And I was like, wow, I'm just so amazed by this. And you don't learn a lot of these things growing up. It's not taught to you. And it was super interesting to me. And I just went down that rabbit hole and I said, you know what? I feel like I have a story to tell. Like I said, people are amazed when I say I was being risky when I had a pension in place and I have this very secure job. And when I say that I was being risky, they look at me funny and like, what do you mean you're being risky? You have this very secure, stable job. And I think, that's my story, how, you can love your job. You can love your 9-to-5 job. However, it doesn't mean that you have to do it for 25, 35 years. You can have a great 10-year career in that field and retire early and enjoy your time and maybe find something you're more passionate about. And I think that's why I want to start this channel, or my channel, also because I'm also looking at it from the market was changing, and I had a feeling it was going to slow down from a realtor side, and even deals are going to get harder to come by. So I said, I think it's a good time to maybe build a presence, a social media presence, a channel. And hopefully when the market does change or improve, my brand will somewhat be out there and more recognizable, because it does take time to build. It's not overnight. And I felt, just get started and let's do it and see where it goes.
There's something magical about just putting yourself out there. So we were talking about this at the very beginning of this conversation, right? I started writing. That was my entrance into the online conversation. I took a program called Ship 30 for 30 in March of 2022, where the challenge was for 30 days, you were going to write one piece of content per day, 250 words. So you had to express a single thought, and you built that muscle and you put some momentum in place. And that challenge completely changed the trajectory of I would even go so far as to say the trajectory of my life. Once I had that momentum, I kept it up. I've written online every single day since March 2022. That started building, and eventually I launched my newsletter. My newsletter eventually led me to launch this podcast. And all along the way, I wouldn't say I've had stratospheric growth by any stretch of the imagination. But what I would say is that the quality of the relationships that I built along the way, the people that I'm speaking to on a regular basis, the conversations that I'm having, and the knowledge that I'm gaining, that has been stratospheric. And launching a show, which again, I have you to thank in many ways for the inspiration, because it was your show that I was on that really, and then I went down the rabbit hole of watching other stuff you'd done on your channel. I was like, man, this guy's having some amazing conversations, really great content, and very educational. And why can't I do that? Starting a channel, this is only my third interview, Mark. I'm, again, grateful that you're here as one of my early guests, but I've already learned so much, even from people that I've already interacted with. You and I have spoken several times, and I've learned several things on this call already. So it's a very powerful channel. Not everyone is inclined to start a channel or post online all the time, but I will continue to preach in the value of participating. You're going to meet other investors that you can validate your ideas with, who can help maybe save you from making a mistake, right? Maybe you want somebody to overlook one of your deals you're analyzing. And if somebody prevents you from making a single mistake, that could also alter the trajectory of your future. So I think it's great that you did, even despite how busy you were and you had all these other things going on, that you chose to start a channel. The information you put out is great. It definitely inspired me to do the same. So one other topic I want to make sure we get to is how your family and your son, how do they play into your plan? Do you want him to be involved? Is any of the investing you do, like how is that incorporated into your overall vision for your business?
Great question. But before we move on, I want to just go back a little bit about like you always saying that I helped you get started. And I'm very thankful for you to say that. However, I think I helped you because I showed you like this fool can get started. He doesn't know what he's doing. Look how I'm just going to do it. And I think that's also what I want people to know is I had no clue what I was doing. I don't have a background. The microphone, you just figure, and you just get started. Just like you're saying, meet other people from every episode. You get better and better. You learn different things. But like you're saying, you're never, just like buying a rental property, there's never a perfect time. And just like starting a YouTube channel or a podcast, there's never an easy time or perfect time to get started. But once you get started, then you just start learning and it gets a lot easier after that. But
I'll put one cap on top of that. A mentor of mine once said, in regards to launching a podcast, he said, give yourself permission to suck for the first 20 episodes. Now, hopefully you don't, but be okay with the idea 50. That there you go. Accept the fact that your first few productions are not going to be perfect. In fact, none of them are going to be perfect. And it might take you a while to establish your voice, your flow, and really feel comfortable. But if you don't put the first one out and you don't have some of those speed bumps and growing pains, you're never going to get to the point where you're comfortable. So you do have to give yourself permission to at least explore and see what it takes to get that comfort. It's not going to come instantly. Some people maybe have that magic gene that makes them come alive in front of the camera, but for most, I think it takes some practice. So yeah, no, great point.
Yeah.
But yeah, so back to the kind of the question about family and how that incorporates into your vision. I'd love to just hear how you think about that.
Yeah. So for me, I have an 8-year-old son. Me and the mom are not together, so we're co-parenting. But for me, so I've also helped his mom get started purchasing real estate out of state. And I'm glad I helped her get started, but I also realized that maybe sometimes out of state is not the best for maybe certain people. And I think that's understanding yourself and knowing your personality. And maybe you need to be a little more hands-on. Maybe you need to be able to be closer to your property. So those are things that you have to figure out for yourself. But I see real estate as a great wealth building tool. And that's where the vision is for my son is I want to, like we talked about it earlier, there's a lot of these things that you're not taught in school. You're taught to be an employee, get a good job, put money in your retirement account. And there's actually a lot of maybe better ways to get financial freedom. And I think that's where my vision is for my son. If he wants to go to college and get a traditional 9-to-5 job, great. But I think there's still a place in there that you need to understand investing And maybe it's not real estate. It could be stocks or crypto maybe, but you do have to find other avenues. And I think if you just go down that traditional path of working 30 to 40 years, putting money in your retirement account, it may not be what you're hoping it to be when it is time to retire. I hope for my son, he sees that there's many ways to do things. I think that's the important thing. But I think really understanding how money works is super important. And not everyone wants 100 rental properties. So even just a few rental properties, I think, is super beneficial. And yeah, so that's what I'm hoping to teach him is it's more about time, right? Freeing up time. And that's where generating extra income comes into play, whether it's starting a business, rental properties, dividend stocks, but just generating extra income separate from whatever job you may have. And I think that's super important.
Absolutely. Extra income is amazing, especially if you can start building it early. There are even apps now. There's one that I really like called Acorns, and I think there's several others like it where you auto round up. You can link it to your credit cards and it'll round up it. If you spend 88 cents, it'll put the 12 cents into a brokerage account that automatically invests in index funds. And so I've gotten a couple of my cousins and younger siblings to use that. And just starting that at age 16, when you're not really thinking about it, you just get that stuff working in the background. And if they start that at 16, 18, 20, that extra decade of saving, like that compounding makes a difference. And it's just building the awareness, to your point of if people want to go to college, 4-year college and come out and get a 9-to-5, that's great. I think a lot of people aren't aware that real estate is an accessible option, not just for the ultra wealthy multimillionaires. Like people can house hack and do creative things when they're young that will just get them incredibly large, unique advantage on their wealth building journey. So just even, I feel the same. My daughter is only almost 2. So obviously I don't have a chance to have these conversations with her just yet. I will consider it a success if she is at least aware that it's an option. So that's really interesting perspective. Well, Marc, we've been talking for a while. I want to be respectful of your time. And I also want to give you a chance to give a nice big plug for your channel, which I am a huge fan of. So why don't you tell us where can people find you and what can they expect from you?
I'm under Financial Firefighter on most platforms. So I'm on X and Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Threads, I guess. But what to look for is I'm actually considering, I don't know if I really have a brand right now, but I'm maybe thinking of rebranding in a sense. So that's something I'm contemplating. But yeah, look for me, Financial Firefighter, YouTube, and please subscribe, comment. I love the comments. There's so much people commenting now, and it's fun because sometimes that leads to our next topic. They comment on something and some of my guests. And my big advice though is if you want to get started on a YouTube channel. But I find these like interviews or chatting with someone else is super helpful because after a while it gets hard just being the only one on camera talking by yourself. So I think interviewing, networking, and you meet cool people. And this has been super fun. And I've never met Aaron in person, but I'm sure we will at some point. But we connected on X, and it's fun. You have a lot of things in common, and you can always pick their brains and start a fantasy football league together.
Yes, fantasy football. Marc and I are in a fantasy league. That was his suggestion. We got a group of other real estate investors, all of which we met on X, and it's been a lot of fun. And I think, Marc and I haven't met in person, but maybe we'll plan a trip to Pittsburgh sometime soon and check it out.
Hawaii of the Northeast, you said?
The Hawaii of the Northeast. If it's not a thing, then hopefully me saying that and putting it out there, now that'll be a saying. Marc, thanks again. I really appreciate it. And looking forward to putting this out there. And thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks, man. I'm glad you got started with this.
Heck yeah.